Well, so, well, thank you. And so I'll get started. I think just to get started, I want to just make clear that I'm using application here in the old-fashioned sense of the word, because I was talking to people here. It says like, oh, Lua applications. Yeah, I want to make like apps, mobile apps. So mobile apps are one kind of application, but by application I mean everything that's like not the operating system, not libraries. They're like whole programs, right? So it's essentially what kind of stuff that we end up talking about programming in the large, writing entire programs. And so there's a whole lot of stuff that we could talk about here, and I put in the subtitle "Starting Conversation" because I think this is a topic that does not get talked about enough in the Lua world, and I think it's something that we should talk about more, and because people are doing it. So well, essentially, I think whole books could be written about this. I'm actually thinking about writing one. But to get started, I think we have to just start and talk about it. So I'm going to go through a few topics here. So this is what we're going to talk about here, like this notion of programming in the large. And so and this may sound at first like something that doesn't really have to do much with Lua, because we have this idea that it's a small language, it's a scripting language, it's an embedded language, it's a language for other kinds of uses. So we get to this question first: what is Lua for anyway? Is this even like a reasonable idea to use Lua for programming in the large, for using for this kind of applications? Well, the first thing is that people are already doing it. Like we are doing it, so we have to talk about it and we have to think about it. But this is a fair question, right? And to go looking for an answer, like we can do what Roberto says we don't do and look for the documentation. So if we go back in time, in Lua 5.0, it says that Lua kind of defines itself as like an extension language for configuration. Here it says that Lua is intended to be used as a configuration language. And that's like, it's in its origins. As time went by, well, configuration became scripting. So around 2006, Lua is intended to be used as a scripting language. So it's an extension language it's used to be used for scripting. And so as time went by, then it says, okay, so it's settled, and it's a scripting language. Okay, so maybe it's not an application language. But if you go to the third paragraph, then it says that, well, Lua is intended to be used both as a scripting language and as a standalone language. So now at least we have the blessing of the Holy Manual. So this is not a taboo topic anymore, and we can talk about application development in Lua. So let's write standalone programs in Lua. So let's write games. We just seen like an awesome talk. You guys like, who don't speak Portuguese, they just missed an awesome talk about like games, which is one kind of like whole program development in Lua. We can write servers for different protocols. We have like XMPP protocols written, servers written in Lua and all this kind of thing. We're going to see later today like theorem provers written in Lua, and there's of course package managers written in Lua. That's my main Lua project is the Lua package manager, Lua Rocks, which is a whole application written in Lua. So it can be done, and it is done. And so, okay, awesome. So where do I start? A lot goes into writing an application. So there are many like axes that we have to think about. The first one is like the language itself, and then we have to think about the language environment. We have to think about the development tools, and we have to think about the deployment, how it's going to happen. So on each one of these things, what do I mean by each one of these? The language itself is, well, first of all, which version of Lua? And also, like, does it matter which version of Lua are we targeting? And I'm going to talk about more about this later. Then we get to the language environment. So I have to think about, like, as Igor was also saying earlier, like, which frameworks are we going to use? What platforms are we targeting? Which libraries are we going to use? Like, your program is not going to live in a vacuum. Also, nowadays, development tools are fundamental. So we're talking about editor support, static checkers, because Lua is a dynamic language, and so those things are welcome. And testing is really important. Continuous integration, CI, also like fundamental for modern development. And finally, deployment, and how users install and run your program. So depending on what kind of program you're making, on what kind of users you have in mind, this is going to have like wildly different answers. So, and then we get to the point that I was talking earlier about programming in the large. Like, okay, so you started writing your program starts to get bigger and bigger. Like, and so some specific concerns come up that it's different from scripting, because everyone says like, oh, so what's nice about Lua? Oh, Lua is nice because it's a scripting language, and like besides all of the specific like list of features, like as a whole, you know, being in a scripting language means you can do like rapid prototyping. You know, you can start quickly and get something off the ground fast. But then your program gets larger, you know, and then you have different concerns. And it usually involves dealing with teamwork, because sometimes a program is not a one-person project. And then you also care about, you may care about long-term maintenance. And to deal with those things, I think you have to kind of keep those things in mind and do some kind of coding for collaboration, which is like different of writing a program like thinking that you are the only person who's ever going to look at that code. And thinking about like architecture in like in a software engineering sense in general. And so about like how to handle complexity. And I'm gonna, like, as I said, this talks about like starting a conversation on all those topics. I'm gonna go through some of these, but not all. And so we'll see where we'll get. So one of the questions is, okay, which Lua? So I think like that was the first question there in that list of concerns that I brought up. So this is one thing that you're gonna have to think about. You know, you're gonna get it started like the first day. You have to think, okay, which version of Lua I'm gonna install, which I'm gonna use. And this is something that happens in programming languages communities. This is not exclusive to Lua. You know, if you come from the Python world, you know all about like the Python 2 versus Python 3 thing. If you come from the Perl world, you know the whole thing about Perl 5 versus Perl 6. And Roberto was mentioning this earlier, and there was a question about like, oh, your freedom to change things, and where does your flexibility go? And then comes a point where some version is like really established, you know, and people have like, you know, bet a lot on it, and then a new version comes up, you know, and this new version is going to be good for some users, and it's not going to be good for other users, and then you have an ecosystem of language versions. This happens, like, I think this is bound to happen in, you know, every successful language, you know, that gets more than one version, and all the successful ones do. You know, even like you say C++, there's legacy projects out there. They use like ISO C++, and then let's go with C++ 11. The same thing happens with C even. So it's unavoidable. You know, it's not like a specific issue with Lua, but it happens. So right now, if we're going to talk about like what are like the relevant versions of Lua in some sense, you know, you would say like I would say that at least like last 3 versions. Like no one ever talks about Lua 5.0 anymore, but people like various people care about like various levels of compatibility with like Lua 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3. And also, like, this is the latest version of LuaJIT, and this is the one that's under development. But which I know there are people who are living in the bleeding edge, because people who go for LuaJIT, they usually are after like the last drop of performance. So sometimes don't worry about the bleeding edge, so they go in that direction. And even then, you have some more options in the Lua ecosystem, like family of languages. You have like MoonScript, which is kind of like the coffee script for Lua. And you have Terra for multi-stage metaprogramming. Have Ravi, which is like another JIT player. And we have Typed Lua, which is at this point a research project, but it's in active development. So the situation is that each version has different features, you know? And this is an incomplete table. Just like I whipped it up together for this presentation, and does not like intend to be complete, but it gives you an idea of like the variety of the situations that we're dealing with. So as new versions of like the standard distribution of Lua comes up, like new features come along. Some of them are deprecated, you know, and then you have like Luajit, which follows like a parallel cycle of development, and in general, like the short version that people say is that like Luajit is, you know, it aims compatibility with Lua 5.1, you know, but so some people say it will give you like the advice saying that, oh, if you want to just be compatible with everything, you know, just target Lua 5.1 and it will run everywhere, you know. But this is kind of not the case, you know, because lots of the features from 5.2 and 5.3 are available in either Luajit 2.0, but lots of stuff from Lua 5.3 is now coming for Luajit 2.1. But most of these things that we will see, you can like get around with compatibility layers and things like that. But some of them are like, I should have highlighted goto there as well, because it's a pretty big like breaking change if you use it, if you need it. But here, if you're going for like bitwise operators and 64-bit integer subtype, which is like features from Lua 5.3, you know, then you're like invested in 5.3, and you're not going to like your code's going to be for 5.3 specifically and not for Luajit. On the other hand, if you're invested in FFI, then your code's going to be like pretty much oriented towards Luajit, you know, and not the standard Lua distribution from PUC. You know, so those are things to have in mind. But when you're writing an application, it is surprisingly possible to actually write for the common subset. You know, this is actually easier than it seems. LuaRox does it, so LuaRox runs in all of those versions. You know, so it's looking at that table, it may seem hard, but it's actually not. And to get around those issues in that table, there are many compatibility libraries. You know, my name's in some of them. You know, so and so you get stuff for like if you need like Luajit compatible bit operations, if you need Lua 5.2 compatible bit operations, and then this is like a sorted bag of compatibility functions for those two versions. And there's even a version of the FFI for standard Lua, which was developed from it was forked from another version, but it was further enhanced by people in Facebook even. So even doing FFI in plain Lua is possible. So next topic, going through things about application development. There's a funny observation that I made that I decided to call the Perl paradox. So programming languages, they have their mottos, you know, they have their sayings that, you know, that pretty much define how people from the language community like see things, you know. And in Perl, they have this saying that goes there's more than one way to do it. You know, for anything you make questions about Perl, they're going to tell you there's more than one way to do it. Python, on the other hand, it tries to be like the antithesis of Perl. And in the Zen of Python, which is like one of the you know, tenets of the language community, it says like there should be one and preferably only one obvious way to do it. You know? And on the other hand, Lua goes with like the most often repeated saying in Lua is like mechanisms and not policies. You know? So what does that mean? You know, Perl has like this, the opposite of minimalist, you know, the maximalist design. It goes like for everything there's like n ways of doing something, you know. And whereas in Python it goes for an opinionated design, you know. They have like one way of doing something, you know. Well, at least one obvious way. So sometimes there are the non-obvious ways as well. Right? But the community tries to steer you towards one specific way. And you probably see where I'm going with this, right? Because Lua is the minimalist way, so you have like 0 ways to do it. Right? So, where is the feature to do X? No, it does not include the feature to do X. You know, it gives you the tools so you come up with the features to do X. Right? So, but then you get into a paradox. When you get to the total minimalism, right? It gives you a set of tools so you can do like, you know, the feature X the way you want. But it turns out that there's more, the corollary for this is that there's more than one way to do it. You know, so in the end, you have the tools, you know, the mechanisms to come up with the features, and people end up coming up with different solutions, right? So yeah, so it's kind of paradoxical that you have like either the maximalist design or minimalist design, and you kind of get with similar end results in practice, you know. So in the end, people end up with this thing that, okay, so I have all the mechanisms, and I'm going to develop my application. My application is my world here, right? So and so there's a funny XKCD strip like about like Lisp developers, and it goes like the guy feels like he's having like a transcendent experience, you know, because when all you have is like the fundamental tools, it feels like you're creating a whole universe, you know. So it kind of feels like playing God, you know, when you're building everything from first principles. So this is all, it's all fun, and when people are developing like my entire application, they say, no, this is my world. You know, it's just not like a small library that I'll have to make interact with everything else. This is my application. So why am I talking about this here? And because it's relevant for application programming. And in Lua specifically, because of the whole thing about mechanisms and not policies, you end up pretty much tempted to go this way. And so it has good sides to it and it has bad sides to it. Like the good sides to it, of like creating your own little world, coming up with everything you need when developing your application, is that, well, for one, you have control over all components, right? So they're not gonna change under your nose. Everything you come up with is gonna be tailored for your application, which is also quite evident. And also, like, everything's gonna be exactly the way you want, right? So these two are a little different because this one, like tailored for your application, refers to your needs in terms of what your application really needs. And the second one refers to your tastes, you know, that it could be either one way or another, but it goes like your way because you're the one creating it, right? So, of course, it also had bad sides. And I'm going to list them here. So these are the bad sides. And so I'm going to rewrite them, but it's really the same thing. So like this. So if on one hand you have control over all your components, on the other hand you're going to have responsibility over all your components, right? You don't have like a community around that takes care of lots of the components for you, right? On one hand, if you get something that's tailored for application only, for application, it's going to be tailored for your application only. So even if your application changes later, you know, the stuff's probably not flexible enough yet, you're going to have to go there and add all the extra features you need. And when things are like idiosyncratically exactly the way you want, you know, when you talk about coding for collaboration later, you know, maybe the way you want's not the way the others want, right? So if you're dealing like with standard components and things like that, it's easier for other people to jump into your code base, you know, and either like cooperate, like in a free software open source context, or even like if in a commercial application, like to get like a new employee to get into your code base, you know. So we have this big application in our company, right? It's all in Lua, but we developed like custom versions for all modules. So everything you know about the Lua world, you know, it's not valid here, like in our in-house little environment where we recreated the whole world, you know. And this is bad. So creating the world each time for each application is something to avoid. And also, of course, it's a lot of work. So I propose one kind of solution. It's kind of more of a social solution than a technical one. It's a technical one, but it's a change in mindset, right? So even if you were writing like one big library, I would say that you should structure as much of your application as possible as libraries. Unfortunately, that's a lesson that I learned over time after Lua Rocks was already started, and so it has like lots of modules, but they're not like separated enough. They have like lots of interdependencies between them. So the idea is that once you start splitting concerns into libraries, you're going to jump more often into the opportunity of reusing existing ones, you know, and avoiding some of the problems that I talked about. But at the same time, you cannot go like overboard writing libraries or never get to the actual application that you want to write, right? So Well, let's talk about libraries. If I just want to talk about program, I don't want to be a library developer, and make like ultra generic versions, like architecture astronaut, all those things. What about like the keep it small and simple principle? Well, there are reasons for not using this kind of monolithic design. First of all, Lua being a dynamic language, the structure of your tables, which are the structure of your data structures, which is the most important thing in your program, is not like spelled out, anywhere in the program. Because as table changes, they gain fields, they lose fields, and it's written down in the code. You have to, have to trace that as you read the code. It's not like you have like class definitions at the top or things like that, where you can just like struct and it quickly scans how your code is, your data is laid out. So it's just too tempting as you write the code to just create tables as you go and pass them around, and it's really good for prototyping, But eventually things get out of hand. There was one consulting project that we were working on, I was involved with, and we have to look at the legacy code base of an application, and it's like a nightmare, like looking at the code and where everything's interdependent with everything, and you have to go like, okay, well, so what's the lifetime of this field in this table? Which parts of the code are responsible for keeping the field up to date? Is this the only place where this field is used? What if I remove the field? Is everything else going to break somewhere? And because of aliasing, sometimes things have different names. It gets like, it can get really complicated. So this kind of library-oriented design that I'm mentioning here, for one, it helps coding for collaboration. So you have like well-defined programming interfaces, well-defined responsibility boundaries also. So this guy, checks this part, this girl checks another part, and everyone's, and even then you might say like, well, but look, Igor programmed the whole game by himself. It doesn't need coding for collaboration. It's like a one-person project. But even then, sometimes you have to collaborate with your future self. So coding is always like coding for collaboration, and even like one-person projects is like multiple-person projects, because the person changes over time. And so this idea helps tame complexity. So it's the good old divide and conquer. So here's the keep it small and simple principle. Every piece should ideally be small and simple. And one thing about the library mindset is that when you're writing libraries, you're kind of forced to go with a different approach, because the library mindset helps you to avoid tricks. Lua allows you to do like lots of smart tricks. So there's lots of things that you end up avoiding when writing a library that's supposed to be like used and plugged in different places. So things like global meta table magic, you can like just, I'm gonna just change the meta tables of all strings in my program all at once, and things like that. You would never do that in the library, because then you're gonna be breaking client code, and all sorts of like, usually like the stuff that has global effects, you're gonna end up like avoiding them, So the message is don't create another incompatible world. So in the end, your main program is going to be like a client of some well-behaved libraries, and not its little custom world. And one nice side effect is then you're going to be compatible with other development tools, many of which have to use those special metatable and debug library tricks and things like that. Because if you start using like the debug hook yourself to do some crazy stuff, then you're going to try to plug in like the coverage analysis counter, and that wants to use a debug hook, and things will get messy. Well, of course, when you're using Lua like as an embedded scripting language and within a non-Lua app, then you are in a little custom world, and nothing that I said here really applies. And as I said, there's a lots and lots more that can be said and discussed about Lua application developer. So, and I just wanted like to really get this conversation started here. And so, as my time's coming to a close, I'm just going to like really like quickly go through a brief tour of tools, just in case of if you got interested in this, just to give you some pointers. This the PDF is on my website, and all the links are clickable, and you can just go with that. So tools matter. As we know, like Lua is like this super small virtual machine, like 250K, right? And it's written in pure ISO-C for maximum portability. So it does not come with like batteries included. You have to include the other stuff. You will need more. On one hand, for interaction with the system, but more also in the sense of like development tools. So in terms of like, so just going, as I said, like I'm just These are all links in the PDF, and you can go for more reference. So the platform you're developing for, is it a desktop app? Is it a mobile app? Is it a web app? You know, and for all of these, you already have like some foundation, you know, that you can build upon, right? So I'm not going to go through each of them, but and Igor already made an awesome case for Love2D as a single example. Then you get into the issue of development tools. There's a lot to choose from, and if I was going to like take a minute to talk about one of those things, is that I cannot recommend highly enough Lua check. Now, this is a static checker, and this is also a link that points to various like editor integrations. You can integrate it like with Sublime, Atom, Vim, Emacs, you know, and you name it. You know, and you get like static checks for your code, and you get like all your undeclared globals, you know, and lots of silly mistakes that you end up making. Usually in development in a dynamic language, this catches a lot of them, you know, and speeds up your development a lot. And also, if you're doing like continuous integration, you know, check out this awesome talk about Travis integration that we had on FOSDEM like 2 years ago. And about deployment, you know, this is the hard question. You know, how are users going to install and run your program? As I said, we unfortunately we don't have yet maybe a simple one-size-fits-all solution for not even for the like the desktop case, but it's something that and Igor kind of mentioned this as well. That say that when you're deploying for different environments, you have to keep that in mind from early on. But it's something that's also something to care about. So in short, you know, Lua application programming is a reality. Lua is not only for scripting, and it is a reality. People are doing it, and programming large kind of requires its own mindset. It's kind of different, but the language, you know, works great for that. It already like has everything you need to do that in some environments, and we saw, and we're going to see some more examples here in this conference. And for some other scenarios, maybe there are still some rough edges, especially in the matter of tools. And being involved with development of tools for Lua development, I'm kind of to blame for that, you know. And but yeah, there's evolution, and it's really a reality. And so yeah, so I hope this conversation continues, and thank you all.
Hi. What do you think of all those projects that try to sort of create a standard library for Lua, such as Penlight, stdlib, and others? It seems like you mentioned XKCD. There's also an XKCD that says when you have different competing standards and you try to create a standard to solve them all, you end up with one more standard. So I think do you think it's a problem in Lua that people try to create all these different libraries to solve the same problems? And how does it goes with Lua application programming?
Well, I think that as long as they can interoperate, you know, that's not a serious problem. And so, you know, like, I would, if I were to be like, you know, pulling things from my own, you know, I would say like, as long as they're all in Lua rocks, it's all fine, you know. But the thing is that as long as they can be declared as dependencies from each other, you know, and they can compose, you know, and because I'm writing an application and I use like library, you know, X and library Y, and if library X wants to use like Penlight's implementation of like a, you know, a B tree or something like that, and the library Y, you know, uses like another like Lua B3 or something like that, and pulls that on dependency. As an application developer, most often than not, that's not a problem for me, right? So if you look at successful ecosystems for those kinds of things, you know, sometimes people say like in the in the Lua mailing list, sometimes they mention like, oh, you have like 5 different competing JSON libraries, as if that was like a major problem, right? But if you look at like Lua rocks, we have like, I don't know, maybe we have like, we haven't reached maybe 2,000 modules yet, right? But you look at Python, it has like 60,000 modules. You look at JavaScript, they have like 200,000 modules, and maybe some of them have like 5 lines of code only, right? But still, it means that the amount of options, it's not a real problem in that sense, because there have to be, like in the Python library, tons of modules that do the same thing, right? The thing is, in the end, it's more of a social thing that the community converges towards some options. Like 10 years ago, instead of saying like giving 2 examples here, of proposals for like a general bag of tricks library, you would be given like 10 different examples, But nowadays everybody talks about Penlight, so I know if I have to go for one, I know which one I would choose, at this point. So I think it's kind of a social thing in the end.
Any more questions? No?
Not really a question, but just a comment. I'm in the same situation about programming Lua in large. My experience is that we kind of suffer. I guess it was mentioned in the list before, the Lisp plague or something. I mean, if you have these options and none of them fits too perfectly, or you want to keep the minimalism, you do it your own, once again, and keep it in your own little world. I just want to congratulate because the topics you mentioned are exactly the same that I have encountered about creating my own world and having to keep track of it, mostly. Modularizing everything and not to create a mess. About the environment, I believe this is still, it's in its infancy. It's still beginning. But I believe it will keep growing. When I started, there was no the Lua development tools for Eclipse, just an example. And then it grew, and it's kind of good. It's actually quite good now.
We still have time for one question. If you want, anyone? No? Yeah? Okay.
There's a question up there.
Okay, I have a hard question. How important do you think JIT is important to applications writing in Lua?
The question about how important is JIT for application written in Lua, JIT is a means to a goal, like when the goal is performance, right? So how important performance is for an application written in Lua, well, that depends entirely on the domain. For some things like an interactive program, nothing's going to be happening faster than the speed that you can type, for example. And I'm writing like a text editor. Nothing in a text editor happens like faster than your fingers, right? So it's usually like, like way faster than it already like needed to be. But from other ones, there's going to be like other people who are trying to extract like the last drop of performance, and then there's a whole like different talk about we could go on with that, and there are different ways to get the performance, in which like JIT is one of them, interacting with C is another one, right? So you have to look at like what are the skills from your team, you know, what are like, you know, the performance characteristics of the application. You know, it can be the solution or it may not be. You know, so it's as you said, it's a hard question, you know, and it has many different possible answers.
Thanks.
So I think that was the last question. So I thank you all. My Twitter account is I'm kind of leaving Twitter by now because I'm using Mastodon, which is like the open source alternative. Yay, Mastodon! But my Twitter's account is the same one. It's like @Hisham_HM. So I'm in both. So all right. So thank you very much.